Hey everyone, it's Ken Pulse with you, and I'm pleased to announce that we have just released a new version of Monkey Tools effective today. And I thought it'd be a really good idea to come along and tell you what's actually included in it so you can see some of the cool stuff that we've actually done here. So the highlights of this particular release are that we have started off with doing some user interface updates, and I'll speak a little bit more to what all of these are as we progress through this particular presentation here. We've got some new and expanded options that allow you to have a little bit more configurability over what's happening in Monkey Tools, as well as things like actually accessing your license information, so you can actually find out what your license key is if you're moving to a new computer, things like that. We've also finally added full PivotChart support for PivotSleuth. This is actually something that to be honest with you, I'm kind of embarrassed wasn't actually working. It always worked for pivot tables, but we've now added it so that PivotSleuth works for pivot charts as well. And I'll get into a little bit more about that when we actually talk about that section. And finally, and here's a really, really cool thing, we've actually released a brand new feature, a brand new shiny ExportMonkey, which is specifically dedicated to exporting your tables to CSVs. And there's lots of functionality around this one that I will go through and actually give you a demo of once we've gone through and sort of talked about the other pieces in this deck. All right, so let's start with the user interface updates. As you know, Monkey Tools has got a fairly long ribbon now with all kinds of commands here. One of the things that I actually did in this release here is I actually went through and adjusted the ordering and the grouping of some of the different submenus. So you'll see Query Monkey, for example. We've got an inject queries section. I've moved the queries from M-code up. The dimensional modeling aids are now grouped together. Some minor things there, honestly, that you're probably not going to care all that much about, but there are some other things that I did in this same area that I think will actually have a little bit more impact. One of my friends, Jeff Weir, ages ago asked me, Ken, it drives me crazy when I'm running in a free mode and I go and I click on something and it tells me that I don't have a license for it. Why can't you just disable the button right up front so I know? So Jeff was absolutely right. It's taken me a long time, but we finally got there. Unavailable commands are now disabled by default. You won't actually be tempted necessarily to click on them. On the other hand, I do want our users who don't have access to these to know what they do. And maybe that I might actually convince them that, hey, you know what, maybe SCD2 Monkey, what the heck is that all about? Maybe it's worth upgrading to a pro license. So what we've also done is for every single monkey in the entire product, which is basically every command that's not a Microsoft command, I have now added custom tooltip text to explain what the monkey actually does. So this works for disabled menu items as well as enabled menu items, so you can get an idea as to what's actually going on inside the product and what features do without, necessarily having a clear name on some of these things. So tooltip text, unavailable commands disabled by default, and just a little bit of reordering or what we've done in the user interface at this point in time. In addition to this, we've added some different configurations in the options area. One of them is the ability to go and manage your license. So in the options version tab, you'll now see that there's a retrieve and manage my license button. When you click on that, that will actually take you to your account login page. You can feed that the email that you used when you purchased Monkey Tools or signed up for your trial. And that will then email you a link that you can use to sign in to get access to your subscription. And in that portal, that's where you can actually recover your license keys. You can change your subscription, cancel it if you need to. Whatever you need to do there is all available to you right from this dashboard. So it should hopefully make life a little bit easier for people as far as license and subscription management. We've also added a show interface in free mode toggle. So this will actually show up on the global options page here. Now, key thing to be aware of on this one, this is available for pro and trial users only, obviously. Free users can't toggle to show it into pro mode. That's not the way it works. But this will allow you, if you're in pro or trial modes, to downgrade your license temporarily to see what a free user sees. Now, you might be asking, well, why the heck would I ever want to do that, Ken? It's a good question, but I'll give you a couple of use cases that I'm aware of. Certainly for doing demos. I mean, I know for myself demoing the software, but granted, it's my software. But let's say that you're on a client site and you want to show them you're using Monkey Tools for something amazing, and you want to show them, hey, look, you guys should download and use this. The feature you need, let me just toggle it into free mode. Look, it's a free feature. You wouldn't even need to pay for it. Or it's a pro feature, you would. So you can actually, use that to control and see what's going on. In addition, it also gives you the ability to look at things and say, do I need to maintain a pro license for what I'm doing? My philosophy in life here is that if you aren't actually getting value from the tool, I'd like you to go hit that manage subscription button, and I don't really want you to be paying for it. I mean, the reality is I want this to be bringing you value. So this is a quick way that you can test whether or not your general workflow needs the pro license features that you've been paying for, or whether or not you should opt out of that subscription. Just keep in mind that when you toggle this, it's about more than just the main menu items that are being disabled. If you actually look in some of our different forms, the Query Sleuth and the DAX Sleuth, for example, there are things that are within those forms that are actually also bound by the free versus pro mode pieces. So you'll want to watch out for those as well. The other thing to know about this one here, this one defaults to unchecked when Excel is launched. So this checkbox will stay checked until you either uncheck it manually, so you can toggle it on and toggle it off, or when you restart Excel, it's going to clear it out. We're never going to leave you in free mode when you've paid for a pro mode license. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is that we've added well, not really added so much as expanded the dialog for resetting the defaults for the different features that we actually use. One of the things that Monkey Tools does is that when you're actually making choices in a lot of our different forms, we like to learn from those and help prompt you with those next time around. We believe that, a lot of the time you do the same kind of jobs, so it makes sense to set your defaults as you did it previously. And we've got, some algorithms that actually work even a little bit smarter than that, trying to be a little bit predictive on different things. But sometimes you want to actually wipe those out and start fresh again because maybe something isn't just working the way that you want, or something's not toggling properly. So we now allow clearing of all of these defaults. This tab is not new, but I believe when I first started going in to play around with this, I think we had about 5 of these forms on here, not this incredibly long list. And I'll say personally, it's a little bit humbling actually to see just how many different forms we actually have in this list now, how many things Monkey Tools is actually doing. So hopefully that should help you manage things a little bit easier. In order to clear out the default, just check the box, hit reset, and it'll wipe out all of those defaults. You can go back to the normal state that's there when you first opened Monkey Tools ages ago. Let's talk quickly about PivotChart support and PivotSleuth. Let's say that I've got a couple of pivot charts here, and no criticisms on how ugly they are or anything like that, but they're both pivot charts. And that horrible feature that you get when you select a pivot table or a pivot chart, and in the pivot table field list, you get this, the relationships may be needed. Well, PivotSleuth has always been built to try and help you solve that problem by presenting you with some contextual information around the fields that you're actually using and where there's potential issues. The challenge is it's only ever worked for pivot tables. We've now expanded it so that PivotSleuth will now work with pivot charts. And I'm showing you 2 here for a very good reason. There are actually 2 different types of pivot charts that we can actually survive or have against the data model. Some of them are where there's a pivot chart that's linked to a pivot table. That's sort of the historical, always been the way kind of pivot chart. But in recent versions of Excel, you can also create a pivot chart that doesn't have a pivot table back to it. If that is important to you, we do identify that in the header of these forms. You see, you still got all of the colorification. You can click on, any of those yellow fields would come back and give you the message about why are these things causing problems and what can you potentially do to solve them and get rid of that relationships may be needed error forever. Because in this case, I can tell you that it's actually not required here. PivotSleuth would actually tell me if I click on one of those fields that I just need to actually hide all the columns in my measures table and everything would work beautifully. So full support for pivot charts now in PivotSleuth. Very happy to finally have that out there. Now let's talk about the new feature that we're really excited about here. This is our new ExportMonkey for exporting tables to CSV. The first thing I'm going to tell you is that this came from a user suggestion. If you have suggestions about Monkey Tools, check out that help menu. There is a place where you can actually log your suggestion, and we'll take a look and see if we can do it, if we think there's enough value there, and balance that against our coding effort. But we love adding new features to this product. So what does the ExportMonkey actually do? Well, the first thing that we decided that we were going to make happen here is that it actually allows us to export the data model tables to CSV. So this is obviously a little bit tricky. There is code that allows you to do this kind of thing, but it's a little bit tricky to get in place and whatever else. And if you don't have it lying around and have the skills to implement it, obviously it's a little bit too hard. So we built it into Monkey Tools to allow you to just click a few buttons and you can now export your data model tables into CSV files. And this will work for all licensed versions, free, trial, and pro. You can choose the export file path. We actually hold on to that for default, so you always know where the heck they're going. We give you one-click access to the export folder once you actually export it, so you can go right to it in Windows Explorer and grab those files and do what you need to do with them. And we even let you rename tables and or columns in the export, so you don't have to take exactly what the data model table is. You can rename them to use different aliases for these things. Renaming a table will actually rename the output file for you. Renaming columns will actually just rename it within the files that are created. All of that is available to all licenses, free, trial, and pro. But of course, as you'd expect, there's more. There is a pro component to this. And that is that in the pro version, you can add custom prefixes or suffixes to each file. So if you want all of your tables prefaced with, say, the date that you exported them, well, you can do that in pro mode or, of course, in trial. If you want to use custom delimiters and file extensions, and those two are mutually exclusive, by the way, you can do that in pro mode. In Monkey Tools, we read your default delimiter from your regional settings in the control panel. So if your regional delimiter is something like, I don't know, maybe a semicolon, we'll use that by default, but we don't let you change it in free mode. In pro mode, we're going to give you what that regional delimiter is, but you can also pick between commas and tabs and different things like that, even the pipe delimiter if you really like that one. We'll provide you with the most commonly used extensions there, whatever the biggest sort of industry standard is, but we'll also let you customize those. And if you customize an extension for a certain file type, we save that for next time because, you know, we're big believers that if you're customizing it, you've probably got a reason. And if you're uploading this to other systems, for example, you probably need that file extension to be the same every time. We also allow you to add columns from related tables. This is what we call model view for browsing things. So what that means is if you've got a full dimensional model with a sales table that links to a chart of accounts and whatnot, our free version is only going to let you export either the sales table, well, or the chart of accounts table, but it won't link them together. But what ExportMonkey will do in its pro mode is you can actually select those columns and combine them into one big flat table, so you only have one export. Okay, so that's a pretty cool, cool feature of the pro mode here. The other thing that pro mode allows you to do is connect to Power BI desktop files. And guess what? We can export Power BI desktop files into CSVs as well. So these are all some of the really cool features that actually work around ExportMonkey. So what are the use cases for this particular piece? And I'll just give you a couple. I know there's many more for this, but one of them that I've heard from a lot of people is that they use Power Query to prep files to upload into other systems. All data prep to do upload. And unfortunately, Power Query doesn't have a load to CSV option. So what these people will do is they'll load things to the worksheet, they'll save as CSV, but then the problem comes in that, well, that takes a little bit of extra effort. And what if you need to use a custom delimiter like a pipe? How do you save it as a pipe delimited file with a DAT extension? Well, that gets a little bit tricky. With Monkey Tools, it's super easy. Just load your data to the data model, and you go and ask the ExportMonkey to do your thing. A few clicks, and it's done, and it saves your defaults for next time. So that's pretty cool stuff. Also, another case is if you're working with a from folder scenario where you've got multiple files, of course, what happens is that every file in the folder needs to be read, and this is the key, transformed before it can be appended to get the big long list of components out of it. What that means is that the more files you add, the longer your history grows, every single one of them still needs to be transformed. So what the ExportMonkey can do is it can actually take a snapshot of your data model table, download the whole thing to CSV because that data is already transformed. At that point, you can then set up your system to say, read the CSV data and only give me the files that aren't in the CSV, the newer stuff. And at that point, we only need to transform the new stuff and we just have to read the stuff from CSV. So it should help you actually increase the speed of your load by crystallizing a snapshot of your data model at a certain point. I'm sure there's a ton of other issues. I would actually love to know about them. If you've got good use cases where you need CSVs to be exported, let me know. I mean, this is a cool thing. Just leave a comment on the video here and tell me, because I'm always curious how people actually end up using this tool. So now you know all about this, why don't we go and hop into a demo and we can show you how this new feature actually works and what it does. All right, so here we are. We have a data model that I'm going to use for my sample here. You'll notice we have a disconnected measures table with the hidden measures column, so only our measures are actually visible. And between sales and calendar, we actually have two relationships, one of which is inactive. The active relationship is between sales date and calendar date, and the inactive relationship is between the shipping date and calendar date. So just something to be aware of here. There's additional nuances to this model that you may or may not see in the normal course of things. So I'm just going to go and close this and drop back down to Excel, where we've got our nice little pivot table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and open the ExportMonkey export model tables to CSV. And that opens up this form. Now, this is the pro mode look, so everything is enabled. If this were in free mode, what you would find is that the prefix down here would be disabled, as would the suffix. The comma would still be listed, as well as the CSV, but both of these would be unchangeable, and the model view would also be blocked out from you as well. But for right now, I figured I should show you all of the features that we actually have here. So by default, when you open up Monkey Tools, it's going to look like this, so it won't have a file path here. So I've actually put a file path in that I want to export all of my files to. If I ever want to go and view this file path, I can just right-click on this little folder. Left-click will actually browse to pick up my folder. Right-click will actually open it in Windows Explorer so I can see that it is actually empty. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to close that for right now. You'll notice that we list all of the tables. We indicate which are fact and dimension tables if that's important to you. I don't need the measures table here, so I'm just going to go and uncheck that. There's only one row. That's just a simple place to go and hold my my measures. But let's say that I want to export, say, the sales and the budget tables. There we are. And I want to rename my sales table and call it sales data. All right. And then maybe inside here, I don't want to call my amount column, which you'll notice is hidden. That's why it's italicized. I want to go and rename this one to sales dollars, for example. Okay, so there we go. So you'll see that when we rename something, it gives us an alias and as something at the end of it. So here we go. We've got 3 columns in budget. I'm actually going to take the ship date off of this as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and say export. And it's now going to go and export those 2 tables into CSV files for me. And so if I now go and say, let's go right click on this and open it up, you can see that there's budget, there's sales data as I renamed it. And if I were to go and double click on that and open it up in Excel now, what we should see is that it is giving me my information. And notice that my sales dollars is called sales dollars. It is not called amount like it was originally. Okay, so a nice, quick, easy, and fast way to export multiple tables from our data model into different files. So that's the basics. You can do all of that with the free mode of ExportMonkey. Now let me show you what happens when we go into Pro mode. I'm going to go and change to Model View. And in Model View, what happens is it actually changes the display. So it's only showing me my fact tables. Now I'm going to get rid of my measures here for a second because I don't need those. And if I open up budget, you'll notice that I've got my amount column. I've got my categories, which is related via the budget category column. It shows me my primary keys in the dark gold and lists all these pieces here. So if I export this right now, budget is going to get me 76 rows, but it's not just going to get me 3 columns. It's also going to grab me category and class. It's going to grab these ones as well. So I might come back and say, look, you know what? Let's just go get rid of the month number. We'll get rid of the day of the week. We'll get rid of the day. We'll just take the date, day name, month name, and year. That sounds good to me. We'll take the class, not the category. Why not? Rename our budgets here and call this budget dollars. That sounds like fun. Whoops. We'll say okay to that one. And yeah, that should probably be good. And then let me go and open this one up. Now, under sales, you'll notice that we've got our categories related by sales category. We've got our calendar using sales date, and we've also got an italicized calendar using sales ship date. This is the inactive relationship. So I can come back here now and say, well, let's open this one up for a second. I don't need all this information. Again, I'm just going to go with some weird column choices here. All right. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my calendar here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the calendar date, but I'm going to rename this one to be ship date. And we'll say OK. And then we'll also I'm going to take a day column and a month column and a year column. And I'm doing this deliberately. I've got one that overlaps, year, versus the other ones. This one's actually been renamed. Okay. So if I go and actually run an export on this now, there's column name conflicts, which is what I'm trying to actually demonstrate here. Year appears in both calendar tables, and I want to try and get that back into my sales table. I'm going to prefix each of these with the date. So when I hit prefix, it automatically puts in today's date. It does the same for suffix, by the way, but you can obviously customize these. I don't really feel like I need a suffix on this one, so I'm going to leave that alone. And maybe I would want to change the delimiter to something different. I could create a tab delimiter, which usually exports into a PRN file, although you can change that. I could go and create a pipe. The normal extension for that is .dat, but you could obviously, of course, change that as well, or colon or semicolon, whatnot. To make life easy on me, just so that I can actually just double click on it and open it up right away with no issues, I'm going to leave it as comma, but just be aware that these things will all work. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm now going to go and say export. And what you'll see is that it is actually exporting those data pieces. And I'm going to go right click on this again, and we're going to open this up. There we are. There's my budget and my sales. I never renamed either of the tables, but let's take a look at what the data is that comes in from both of these. So I'm going to open the budget file first, and let me just go and expand all these columns so we can see what we actually have here. And now I'm going to bring up the ExportMonkey again and take a look. What did we actually get? We renamed this as budget, so that worked. We've got class. We do not have category. We have our date, day name, month name, and year. So budget exported beautifully. There should be 76 rows plus 1 for the header. So there we are. There's 77. Fantastic. So that one is working nicely. Let's see what happens now if we go back into our, let me grab the full file list actually. There it is. And let's bring in the sales file and see what actually happened with this one. And again, we'll go and we'll open all of this up, make sure that the columns are nice and wide so we can see them. And now I'm going to show you what happens with our conflict resolution on our columns. So I'll drop this one down. So we never renamed the file, so it came out as sales, never renamed the amount column. Notice that I never expanded categories, but it was checked. So if I go and open that up, category and class were both checked, so they both came across. Here is date using our calendar date and day name and month name and year. So those ones all came through exactly as you would expect. And then what we got down to here is the next calendar. I'd rename date as ship date. That's exactly what we see here. But then I've also got a day and a month. These column names do not conflict with what we actually had here because we didn't take those columns, so they're named appropriately. Year, however, already existed up here. So we've actually marked this one as year via ship date or via the sales ship date so that we know that that year could actually be different. And this is important because these things can actually be offset just a little bit. As you can imagine, Monday is not day 3, and therefore, when we get closer to the end, the years could end up changing. The last thing that I want to show you with this is that that works, I hope, relatively clearly as to how it all sort of comes down. But the last really cool thing about this, of course, is that if we're in Pro mode, we can connect to a Power BI desktop file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go and hopefully I've got this in my paste buffer, which I do not. So I'm just going to go and browse down and find the file that I'm actually looking for here. So this is going to be one of my test data files for Power BI, and it's this one here. It is already loaded, which is why it's super, super fast. But now if I go into my ExportMonkey, you will notice that it comes back and it says, look, this is the data model that you've connected to with SQL. We've got a hidden date table in here. I certainly do not want that one, or the metrics table. And honestly, I'm not that interested in budgets. I'm going to expand my chit details with 348,000 rows and lots of individual columns that we could actually have here. Holy smokes, this is going to flatten out this entire data model. It's going to make for a very large file, but you know what? Just for fun, I'm going to go and hit the export button, and we're going to let this one actually run and do its thing. And it takes a second to get started because it's got to go and retrieve some of the information from the Power BI data set. And then you'll see that it'll actually start chugging along as it's doing its export. And here it goes. So obviously this is a big file, 348,000 rows. I think there's about 30 or 35 columns in this one as it's going. So it is going to take a little bit of time. So I'm just going to fast forward the video here as it runs through. And there we are. It's now completed. Let's go and check our little folder here. So I'll right click again, and we can see here is the chit details CSV file. It's 100 megs of data that we actually have here. And if I go and double click and open it, it'll probably take a little bit of time for it to actually go and process this and load it into Excel. But what we should see is that we should get a nice big table with all of our data just like that. How cool is that? Now I'm going to close this down. The last thing that I want to point out, because I didn't actually speak to it as we were going through here, is that we do have an unselect all button for all of your columns in here. If you unselect that, that will remove everything, including all of the subtables here. I'm just going to click expand all so you can see everything that we have. We can also then select all, which will select all of the nodes for everything that we have. And of course, expand it will collapse it back down. So there's some options to move around inside here as well. Keep in mind that the defaults get set. My prefix now, next time I open this form, will be checked, as will the model view. So if I go close and I go to export tables again, you'll notice that they pop up. The directory is saved, my choices for delimiters, all of the checkbox options as I've set them. So hopefully you'll find that useful and something that can actually change the way that you work with CSV files and sort of expand some of your capabilities that you actually have with the data model. Thanks so much for watching this video on what's new in Monkey Tools. If you're looking for more Monkey Tools information or you'd like to download or purchase a copy, you can do so at xlguru.ca/monkeytools. You can usually find more information on my blog at xlguru.ca/blog, and you can also join me up on Facebook, on Twitter, or LinkedIn at the links you see on screen. Thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you again.